Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel Pause Verve. If this story touches your heart, please like the video and share it with others. Your support helps us continue bringing you more heartwarming stories. In the shadow of a raging storm, young Emma Larson clings to a trapped dog in a flooding ditch, her heart pounding as the waters rise. With her loyal Border Collie Rusty barking desperately above, she faces a ruthless breeder's greed and a town's hidden scars. Yet through courage and love, Emma's fight to save Shadow sparks a journey of hope, weaving a community together. This is a tale of thrilling rescues and heartwarming bonds, where a girl and her dogs prove that love can conquer any tempest. The morning sun spilled over the rolling hills of Willow Creek, painting the valley in shades of gold and green. The small town, nestled between whispering pines and a lazy, meandering river, was the kind of place where everyone knew the creak of their neighbor's porch swing and the scent of fresh-baked pies drifting from open windows. It was a town that held its people close, even when life tried to pull them apart. At the edge of this gentle world, in a weathered cottage with a sagging porch and a garden overrun with wildflowers, lived Emma Larson, a 9-year-old girl with eyes like storm clouds and a heart that beat for creatures with fur and feathers. Emma's blonde hair, often tangled from her adventures, was tied back in a loose braid as she knelt in the dew-kissed grass, her small hands coaxing a trembling rabbit from beneath a rosebush. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her voice soft as the morning breeze. "You're safe with me." The rabbit's nose twitched, its wide eyes studying her before it hopped closer, nibbling a clover from her palm. Emma's smile lit up her face, a rare brightness that chased away the shadows that lingered. In her gaze, animals were her sanctuary, her way of stitching together the pieces of a world that had unraveled 2 years ago, when a car accident stole her parents and left her in the care of her grandfather, Henry. The cottage door creaked open, and Henry Larson shuffled out, leaning heavily on his cane. His once strong frame was stooped now, his hands gnarled from arthritis that made every movement a battle. But his eyes, a warm hazel that mirrored Emma's, sparkled with a quiet pride as he watched her with the rabbit. "You've got your mother's touch, Emma," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "She could charm a hawk from the sky just like you." Henry had been Willow Creek's veterinarian for 40 years, a man who'd stitched up farm dogs, delivered calves in blizzards, and nursed orphaned fawns back to health. Now retired and slowed by age, he poured his wisdom into Emma, teaching her the language of animals, the flick of a tail, the tilt of an ear that spoke louder than words. Emma gently released the rabbit, watching it scamper into the underbrush, then turned to Henry. "Do you think Mum's watching us? With Dad?" Her question hung in the air, fragile as a soap bubble. Henry's smile faltered, but he nodded, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I reckon they are, kiddo, and they're proud as can be." Emma clung to those words, tucking them away like a treasure. The loss of her parents was a wound that hadn't fully healed, and the pitying glances from townsfolk at the general store or Sunday church services only made it sting more. But here in the quiet of their overgrown yard, with Henry's stories and the animals that trusted her, Emma found a place to belong. Their cottage was a patchwork of memories, faded photos of Emma's parents on the mantel, Henry's old vet, bag in the corner, and a quilt her mother had sewn draped over the couch. The backyard stretched into a small meadow, where Emma spent hours with Rusty, her Border Collie, whose red coat gleamed like autumn leaves in the sunlight. Rusty had been a gift from her parents just weeks before the accident, a gangly puppy, with a white heart-shaped mark on his flank that Emma swore was a sign he was meant for her. Now at 3 years old, Rusty was her shadow, his intelligent brown eyes always watching, ready to nudge her hand when her thoughts grew heavy. This morning, as Emma tossed a frayed tennis ball for Rusty, the dog bounded after it with a joyful bark, his tail a blur. She laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow, and for a moment, the weight of her grief lifted. Rusty returned, dropping the ball at her feet, then pressed his warm body against her legs, sensing the shift in her mood. "You're the best, Rusty," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. He tilted his head as if to say he knew it, and Emma giggled. Their bond was unspoken but unbreakable, a lifeline that tethered her to hope. Willow Creek itself was a character in Emma's story, its streets lined with clapboard houses and shops with hand-painted signs. The town square boasted a gazebo where summer concerts filled the air with fiddle tunes, and the riverbank was a favorite spot for kids to skip stones. But beyond the charm lay a community that had weathered its share of storms, literal and otherwise. The townsfolk knew Emma's story, and while some offered casseroles or kind words, others whispered about how that poor Larson girl seemed too quiet, too drawn to animals over people. Emma didn't mind. Animals didn't whisper or judge. They simply loved her back. As Emma and Rusty played, Henry called from the porch, "Breakfast, Emma." "Pancakes won't eat themselves," she grinned, racing Rusty to the door, her sneakers leaving prints in the damp grass. Inside, the kitchen smelled of maple syrup and coffee, and Henry had set out her favorite plate, the one with paw prints, around the edge. Over pancakes, he shared stories of his vet days, saving a horse with a twisted leg, or the time a raccoon sneaked into his clinic and made off with a bandage roll. Emma listened wide-eyed, soaking in every word. These moments, simple and warm, were the heartbeat of their life together. But even in this cozy morning, a restlessness stirred in Emma. She felt it in the way Rusty's ears perked at distant sounds, in the way the wind carried the promise of spring rain. Something was coming, she thought, though she couldn't name it. Maybe it was the way Henry's hands shook more than usual as he poured orange juice, or the way her dreams lately were filled with her mother's voice, urging her to be brave. Whatever it was, Emma sensed that Willow Creek, with its quiet beauty and hidden scars, was about to teach her something new about courage, love, and the family she carried in her heart. The afternoon sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the meadow behind Emma Larson's cottage. The air was thick with the scent of blooming lilacs and the hum of bees drifting lazily from flower to flower. Emma, her braid slightly unraveled from a morning of chores, sat cross-legged in the grass, her sketchbook open on her lap. She was trying to capture the curve of a sparrow's wing, but her pencil kept straying to the figure at her side. Rusty, her Border Collie, sprawled out with his red coat glowing like embers in the sunlight. His white, heart-shaped mark, faint but unmistakable, peeked through his fur, a quiet badge of their shared history. Rusty's brown eyes followed her every move, alert yet calm, as if he understood her better than she understood herself. Rusty wasn't just a dog to Emma. He was her confidant, her protector, and the keeper of her secrets. 3 years ago, when she was 6 and the world still felt whole, her parents had brought him home as a squirming puppy, all floppy ears and boundless energy. "He's yours, Emma," her mother had said, her smile warm as she placed the wriggling bundle in Emma's arms. "Take care of him and he'll take care of you." Those words had rooted deep in Emma's heart, especially after the accident that took her parents and left her clinging to anything that felt like home. Rusty had been there through every tear-soaked night, curling up beside her on the bed, his steady breathing a lullaby that chased away nightmares. Now at 9, Emma saw Rusty as more than a pet. He was her family, as vital as her grandfather Henry, and as constant as the hills surrounding Willow Creek. His intelligence was uncanny. Henry often said Rusty was smarter than half the folks in town. He could fetch specific items by name, Emma's raincoat, Henry's cane, even her misplaced sketchbook, and he seemed to sense her moods before she did. When sadness crept in, Rusty would nudge her hand with his wet nose or drop his favorite tennis ball at her feet, coaxing her into a game until laughter bubbled up again. "You're my best friend," Emma whispered, reaching over to stroke his soft ears. Rusty's tail thumped the ground, a rhythmic affirmation of their bond. Their connection went beyond playtime. Rusty had a knack for knowing when Emma needed him most. Just last week, when she'd overheard a neighbor at the general store murmur about that poor orphaned girl, Emma had fled to the meadow, her chest tight with hurt. Rusty had followed, pressing his warm body against her as she sat under an oak tree, tears streaking her face. He didn't bark or run off. He just stayed, his head resting on her knee until the ache in her heart eased. It was as if he carried a piece of Henry, watching from the porch, often marveled at Rusty's devotion. "That dog's got your mother's spirit in him," he'd say, his voice thick with memory. Henry had been the one to teach Emma how to care for Rusty, brushing his coat, checking his paws for burrs, and training him with gentle commands. Those lessons were more than practical. They were a bridge to Emma's mother, who'd spent her childhood at Henry's veterinary clinic, learning the same skills. Rusty, with his eager responsiveness, had soaked up every command from sit to find it, but his true gift was his intuition. He seemed to know when Henry's arthritis flared, lying close to the old man's chair as if offering silent support, or when Emma's quiet moments hid a storm of emotions. Today, as Emma sketched, Rusty's ears perked up, catching a distant sound, a low rumble of thunder from clouds gathering on the horizon. Spring in Willow Creek often brought storms, and this one promised to be fierce. Emma glanced at the sky, her pencil pausing. "Looks like rain, Rusty," she said, closing her sketchbook. Rusty stood, his body tense, eyes fixed on the path that wound toward the river. His sudden alertness sent a prickle down Emma's spine. She knew that stance. It was the same one he'd taken last month when a fox had wandered too close to their garden. "What is it, boy?" she asked, following his gaze. Rusty let out a soft whine, his tail still, but his focus unwavering. Emma trusted him implicitly. His instincts had never led her wrong. She remembered Henry's stories about border collies, bred for herding and problem-solving, their minds sharp as a shepherd's whistle. Rusty was no ordinary dog. He was a partner, a guide, and Emma felt a surge of courage knowing he was by her side. "Let's check it out," she said, slipping her sketchbook into her pocket and brushing grass from her jeans. Rusty took a step forward, then looked back, ensuring she was with him. Together they started down the path, the meadow stretching out like a canvas of possibilities. As they walked, Emma's thoughts drifted to the stories Henry told about her parents, how her mother had rescued a litter of puppies from a barn fire, how her father had once spent a night in the woods tracking a lost dog. Rusty, with his heart-shaped mark and unwavering loyalty, felt like a gift from them, a thread tying her to the love they'd left behind. Whatever Rusty had sensed, Emma was ready to face it, because with him, she was never truly alone. The wind picked up, carrying the first drops of rain, and Emma's heart beat faster, not with fear but with the thrill of what lay ahead. The sky over Willow Creek had darkened, the golden hues of the afternoon swallowed by heavy, slate-grey clouds. That churned with the promise of a spring storm. Emma Larson, her braid now damp from the first sprinkles of rain, walked briskly along the river path, Rusty at her side. The Border Collie's red coat was slick with moisture, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the underbrush as if drawn by an unseen force. Emma's sneakers squelched in the softening earth, her heart thrumming with a mix of curiosity and unease. Rusty's alertness was contagious, and though she couldn't yet see what had caught his attention, she trusted his instincts as surely as she trusted the sun to rise. The path curved toward the northern edge of town, where the landscape shifted from wild meadows to manicured fields. Here the sprawling estate of Victor Grayson loomed, its iron gates and pristine fences a stark contrast to the humble cottages of Willow Creek. Grayson's kennel, known as Silver Pines, was a name whispered with both awe and disdain. His dogs, sleek, German Shepherds, regal Dobermans, and glossy Labradors, won ribbons at shows across the state, their pedigrees commanding prices that could buy a year's worth of groceries for most families. But behind the polished exterior, rumors swirled. Old-timers at the diner spoke of dogs kept in sterile cages, trained with harsh methods, and discarded if they didn't meet Grayson's exacting standards. Victor Grayson himself was a man of sharp edges, tall with a tailored suit that seemed out of place in Willow Creek's muddy lanes, and a smile that never reached his cold blue eyes. He'd arrived in town a decade ago, buying up land and building his empire while looking down on the locals' sentimental attachment to their pets. To Grayson, dogs were investments, not companions, and his disdain for Henry Larson's modest life was no secret. Henry, with his weathered cottage and free clinic days for struggling farmers, represented everything Grayson scorned, a belief that animals deserved love, not just profit. Emma had overheard Grayson once at the town fair, his voice dripping with condescension as he told a breeder, The Larsons cling to that mangy mutt like it's family. Pathetic. Emma's thoughts were interrupted as Rusty stopped abruptly, his ears pricked toward a ditch near Grayson's property line. The river, swollen from recent rains, roared nearby, its muddy waters lapping at the banks. Rusty let out a low, urgent bark, his body taut as he stared into the undergrowth. Emma's pulse quickened. "What's there, boy?" she whispered, peering through the drizzle. Then she heard it, a faint, desperate whimper barely audible over the wind. Her heart lurched. Something was in trouble. Cautiously, she approached the ditch, Rusty leading the way. The ground was slick, and she grabbed a low branch for balance, her eyes scanning the shadows. There, tangled in roots and half submerged in murky water, was a Labrador, its black coat matted with mud. The dog's eyes were wide with fear, its body trembling as it struggled against the roots trapping its hind leg. A thin whine escaped its throat, and Emma's chest tightened. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, her voice soft but firm, the way Henry had taught her to speak to frightened animals. Rusty stood guard, his gaze flicking between the Labrador and the path, as if sensing potential danger. Emma knelt at the ditch's edge, assessing the situation. The water was rising and the dog's strength was fading. She needed to act fast, but the muddy bank looked treacherous and the storm was closing in. Her mind raced to Henry's lessons. Stay calm, think like the animal, and never let fear make your choices. She pulled her raincoat tighter, determination settling over her like a shield. "I'm going to get you out," she promised the dog, who lifted its head slightly as if understanding. But as she prepared to climb down, a sharp voice cut through the rain. "What do you think you're doing, girl?" Emma spun around to see Victor Grayson striding toward her, his polished boots sinking into the mud. His face was a mask of irritation, a flashlight in his hand casting harsh beams across the scene. Rusty growled softly, positioning himself between Emma and Grayson, his heart-shaped mark barely visible in the dim light. Emma's stomach twisted, but she stood her ground. "There's a dog trapped in the ditch," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It needs help." Grayson's eyes narrowed as he peered into the ditch, his expression shifting from annoyance to recognition. "That's one of mine," he said coldly. "Must have slipped its leash during a training run. I'll handle it." He took a step toward the ditch, but the Labrador whimpered louder, shrinking back against the roots. Emma noticed the dog's fear, the way its body tensed at Grayson's approach. Her instinct screamed that something was wrong. "It's scared," she said, stepping forward. "Let me help. I know how to calm animals." Grayson's laugh was sharp like broken glass. "You? A child playing at heroics? This isn't one of your grandfather's charity cases, Miss Larson. That dog's worth more than your little shack. Step aside." His words stung, but Emma didn't flinch. She thought of Rusty, of Henry's stories about her mother standing up to bullies who mistreated animals. She wasn't just a child, she was a Larson. And Larsons didn't back down when an animal needed them. "Rusty trusts me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "And I bet this dog will too. If you scare it more, it could get hurt." Grayson's jaw tightened, but he didn't move, perhaps sensing the resolve in her eyes, or the way Rusty's low growl underscored her words. The rain fell harder now, plastering Emma's hair to her face, but she held Grayson's gaze, her heart pounding with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. The Labrador's whimpers grew fainter, and Emma knew time was running out. She had to act with or without Grayson's permission. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the river path into a quagmire as Emma Larson stood at the edge of the ditch, her heart hammering against her ribs. The trapped Labrador, its black coat slick with mud and water, let out a weak whimper, its eyes locked on hers with a desperate plea. The dog's hind leg was caught in a snarl of roots, and the rising water lapped dangerously close to its muzzle. Rusty, Emma's Border Collie, stood tense beside her, his red fur darkened by the storm, his heart-shaped mark a faint beacon in the gloom. Victor Grayson's shadow loomed behind them, his flashlight beam cutting through the rain like a blade, his voice sharp with impatience. "I told you, girl, I'll handle it," he snapped, taking a step toward the ditch. But the Labrador flinched, its body pressing deeper into the mud. "No," Emma said, her voice firm despite the chill seeping into her bones. "You'll scare it, I can do this." Her words hung in the air, defiant and clear, surprising even herself. Grayson's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer, but Emma didn't wait for his response. She turned to Rusty, her best friend and anchor, and whispered, "Stay, boy, keep watch." Rusty's ears flicked, and he sat, his gaze flicking between Emma and Grayson, a silent promise to protect her. Emma's raincoat, a bright yellow hand-me-down from her mother, was already soaked, but she tightened the hood and assessed the ditch. The bank was steep and slick, the mud treacherous, but the Labrador, whom she'd already started calling Shadow in her mind, needed her now. "Be careful, Emma," she muttered to herself, channeling Henry's calm advice from countless lessons. "Think like the animal, move slow, stay steady." She eased herself onto the bank, gripping exposed roots for balance as her sneakers sank into the muck. The ground shifted under her weight, and for a heart-stopping moment, she slid, her fingers clawing at the earth. Grayson's flashlight beam wavered, and she heard him mutter something about foolish kids, but she blocked him out. Shadow's whimpers were her focus, each one a tug on her heart. "I'm coming," she called softly, her voice cutting through the storm's roar. "You're gonna be okay." The ditch was deeper than it looked, the water colder, rising to her shins as she reached the bottom. Shadow's eyes followed her, wide with fear, but flickering with hope. Emma crouched, keeping her movements slow, her tone gentle, the way Henry had taught her to soothe frightened animals. "Hey, Shadow," she murmured, testing the name. "I'm here to help. We're going to get you out." The dog's ears twitched, and though it trembled, it didn't pull away. Emma's heart swelled. Shadow was listening, trusting her, even in this chaos. She reached for the roots trapping Shadow's leg, her fingers numb from the cold water. The roots were thick, knotted tightly around the dog's ankle, and the mud made them slippery. She tugged gently, but Shadow yelped, and Emma froze, her mind racing. "Don't force it. Feel what the animal feels." She adjusted her grip, working to loosen the roots without causing pain. Above, the storm raged on, thunder rumbling like a warning, and Grayson's voice broke through. "Hurry up, girl, or I'll drag it out myself." Emma's jaw tightened, but she didn't look back. Shadow needed her to stay calm. As she worked, the ground beneath her shifted again, a sickening lurch that sent her heart into her throat. The bank was eroding, the river's current eating away at the soil. She glanced up, realizing the ditch was becoming a trap for her too. Rusty's bark pierced the air, sharp and urgent, and Emma knew he sensed the danger. "Almost there," she whispered to Shadow, her hands shaking but determined. With a final careful twist, she freed the root, and Shadow's leg came loose. The dog scrambled forward, pressing against her, its wet fur soaking her raincoat. Emma wrapped her arms around Shadow, relief flooding her. "Good boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. But her victory was short-lived. The bank gave way with a wet, crumbling roar, and Emma felt the ground vanish beneath her. She clutched Shadow, her body sliding into the deepening mud, the cold water swallowing her legs. Panic clawed at her chest as she struggled to find footing, the mud sucking at her like a living thing. Shadow whined, clinging to her, and Emma's arms burned with the effort of holding them both above the water. "Rusty!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. From above, Rusty's frantic barking echoed, and she heard Grayson curse, his flashlight, beam swinging wildly. Emma's mind flashed to Rusty, to Henry, to the warmth of their cottage. She couldn't give up. Not for Shadow, not for herself. She dug her fingers into the mud, searching for anything to hold on to, but the world was a blur of rain and darkness. Shadow's weight pressed against her, a reminder of why she was here. And she whispered, "We're not done yet." But the mud was relentless, pulling her deeper, and her strength was fading. Rusty's barks grew more desperate, and Emma prayed he'd find a way to get help before the storm claimed them both. The storm over Willow Creek roared with unrelenting fury, the rain a deafening curtain that blurred the world into shades of grey and brown. Emma Larson clung to the muddy bank of the ditch, her small body half submerged in the rising water, her arms locked around Shadow, the frightened Labrador she'd freed from the roots. The cold seeped into her bones, her raincoat a sodden weight. and the mud sucked at her legs, threatening to pull her deeper. Shadow's trembling body pressed against her chest, his whimpers barely audible over the river's roar, but his warmth anchored her, a fragile spark of hope in the chaos. Above, Rusty's frantic barks cut through the storm, sharp and relentless as the Border Collie paced the ditch's edge, his red coat a blur against the darkening sky. Victor Grayson stood nearby, his flashlight beam flickering uselessly, his voice laced with irritation rather than concern. "This is absurd," he shouted into the wind. "I'm calling my foreman to deal with this." Emma's heart pounded, her breath shallow as she fought to keep her head above the water. The bank was collapsing faster now, each shift of the earth dragging her closer to the river's hungry current. She could feel Shadow's panic mirroring her own, his claws scrabbling against her as he struggled to stay afloat. "Hold on, Shadow," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "We're not giving up." Her mind clung to memories of Henry's lessons. Stay calm, focus on the next step. Animals trust you when you trust yourself. But the cold and fear made it hard to think. Rusty's barks were her lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't alone, even as Grayson's indifference stung like the rain on her face. Back at the cottage, Henry Larson sat by the kitchen window, his gnarled hands gripping the arms of his chair. As he stared into the storm, the clock on the wall ticked past the time Emma usually returned from her walks with Rusty, and a gnawing worry settled in his chest. His arthritis flared, making his cane feel heavier than usual, but his mind was sharp, replaying the way Rusty had paced by the door earlier, his ears pricked with urgency. "She's out there too long," Henry muttered, his voice rough with fear. He reached for the old rotary phone, wincing as his fingers fumbled the dial, and called Dr. Laura Bennett, Willow Creek's veterinarian and a trusted friend. "Laura, it's Henry," he said when she answered. "Emma's not back and this storm's turning ugly. Rusty's with her, but I've got a bad feeling." Dr. Bennett's voice was calm but decisive. "I'm on my way, Henry. Stay put. I'll grab some folks and check the usual paths." She hung up and sprang into action, pulling on her rain gear and calling Sheriff Tom Reynolds, a steady man who'd known Emma since she was a toddler. Within minutes, a small group assembled at the clinic. Laura, Tom, and a handful of volunteers, including Mrs. Clara Evans, the former dog show judge whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Laura briefed them quickly, her voice cutting through the patter of rain on the clinic roof. "Emma's likely near the river path. She and Rusty always go that way. With this flooding, we need to move fast." Meanwhile, Rusty's barks grew, more desperate, his paws digging at the ditch's edge as he tried to reach Emma. The Border Collie's instincts were razor-sharp, honed by years of Henry's training and his unbreakable bond with Emma. He glanced at Grayson, who was now on his phone shouting orders to his staff, and Rusty's growl deepened. The dog's heart-shaped mark seemed to pulse with determination as he turned and bolted down the path, his legs churning through the mud. Emma, struggling to hold Shadow, caught a glimpse of Rusty's red coat vanishing into the rain. Rusty. "Get help," she called, her voice cracking with hope and fear. She knew he'd understood. Rusty always did. Rusty's flight took him toward town, his senses guiding him through the storm's chaos. He reached the main road just as Dr. Bennett's truck rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the downpour. Laura slammed on the brakes as Rusty planted himself in the road, barking furiously, his eyes wild but focused. "That's Rusty," she said, leaping out with Sheriff Reynolds. The dog didn't hesitate, turning and running back toward the river, pausing only to ensure they followed. "He's leading us," Clara observed, her voice steady despite the wind. The group piled into the truck, following Rusty's path, their hearts pounding with the urgency of his mission. Back at the ditch, Emma's strength was waning. The water had risen to her waist, and Shadow's weight was pulling her under. She hooked one arm around a protruding root, her fingers numb but unyielding, and used the other to keep Shadow's head above the surface. The Labrador's eyes, once filled with terror, now held a quiet trust as if he sensed Emma's resolve. But the ground trembled beneath her, and a sickening crack signaled another collapse. Mud and water surged around her, and Emma gasped, her grip on the root slipping. "Please, Rusty," she whispered, her voice lost in the storm. Grayson, still on the phone, finally noticed the severity of the situation. His face paled as he saw Emma sinking, and for a moment his polished facade cracked. "Hold on!" he shouted, scrambling toward the ditch, but the mud was too unstable and he slid back, cursing. The reality of the crisis and his own helplessness hit him hard, but his concern was less for Emma than for the potential loss of his valuable. Just then, headlights pierced the rain, and the roar of Dr. Bennett's truck announced the rescue team's arrival. Rusty led the way, barking as he reached the ditch, his tail a frantic metronome. Laura and Sheriff Reynolds leaped out, their faces grim as they spotted Emma and Shadow. "Emma, we're here," Laura called, her voice a beacon. Clara, clutching a rope from the truck, directed the volunteers with the precision of her judging days. "Secure the rope to that tree," she ordered. "We'll pull her up." Emma's heart surged at the sight of Rusty and the team. "I've got Shadow," she shouted, her voice weak but determined. The volunteers worked quickly, lowering the rope to her. Laura slid down the bank, her boots braced against the mud, and helped Emma loop the rope around Shadow's torso. "You're doing great, Emma," she said, her calm professionalism steadying the girl. Together they secured Shadow, and the team above hauled the Labrador to safety, his paws scrabbling as he reached solid ground. But as Emma reached for the rope herself, the bank gave way completely, and she sank deeper, mud encasing her legs. A cry escaped her lips, and Rusty's barks turned frantic. The stakes were higher than ever. Emma had saved Shadow, but now her own life hung in the balance, and the storm showed no mercy. The storm's fury battered Willow Creek, the river's roar a constant threat as Emma Larson clung to the crumbling ditch, her body sinking deeper into the mud. The cold water swirled around her chest, her arms aching from the effort of holding onto a gnarled root, the only thing keeping her from being swept away. Above, the rescue team, Dr. Laura Bennett, Sheriff Tom Reynolds, Mrs. Clara Evans, and a handful of volunteers, worked frantically, their voices shouting over the wind as they secured ropes and scanned the collapsing bank. Rusty, Emma's Border Collie, paced the edge, his red coat soaked and his heart-shaped mark barely visible, his barks a desperate plea for his girl. Shadow, the Labrador Emma had freed, lay shivering on solid ground, wrapped in a blanket by a volunteer, his eyes fixed on the ditch where Emma fought to survive. Victor Grayson stood apart, his flashlight now useless, his face a mix of frustration and unease as the reality of the crisis sank in. Dr. Bennett, her rain gear slick with mud, slid back down the bank, her hands steady as she reached Emma. "Hold on, Emma, we've got you," she called, her voice a lifeline. Emma's teeth chattered, but she nodded, her storm cloud eyes fierce with determination. Laura looped a rope around Emma's waist, tying it with practiced precision. "Pull!" she shouted, and the team above heaved, their boots slipping in the mud. Emma's grip on the root faltered, but the rope held, and inch by agonizing inch, they dragged her from the ditch. As she reached the top, Rusty rushed to her, licking her face, his warmth a comfort against the biting cold. Emma collapsed into Laura's arms, gasping. "Shadow, is he okay?" "He's safe, thanks to you," Laura said, wrapping a blanket around Emma's shoulders. Sheriff Reynolds knelt beside her, his face etched with relief. "You're one brave kid, Emma Larson." But Emma's eyes darted to Grayson, who was inspecting Shadow with a clinical detachment, muttering about the dog's condition. Her heart sank. Shadow's rescue wasn't the end of the fight. Grayson's claim to the dog loomed like the storm, clouds above, and Emma knew he'd never value Shadow the way she did. The team hustled Emma and Shadow to Dr. Bennett's truck, Rusty leaping in beside them. As they sped toward Henry Larson's cottage, the only high ground safe from the flooding, Emma shivered under the blanket, her mind racing. Shadow curled against her, his wet fur soaking her further, but she didn't care. His trust in her, the way he'd calmed at her voice, felt like a promise she had to keep. Rusty, sensing her turmoil, rested his head on her knee, his brown eyes steady. "You did good, Rusty," she whispered, stroking his ears, but the question gnawed at her. How could she protect Shadow from Grayson? At the cottage, Henry waited on the porch, his cane trembling in his grip as he peered into the storm. The sight of the truck pulling up sent a wave of relief through him, though his hazel eyes clouded with worry when he saw Emma's mud-caked form. Laura helped her inside, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the cozy kitchen. Henry enveloped Emma in a hug, his arthritis forgotten in the moment. "My brave girl," he said, his voice thick. "I thought I'd lost you." Emma clung to him, the weight of the ordeal crashing over her, but Rusty and Shadow's presence grounded her. As Laura tended to Shadow, checking for injuries, Henry sat Emma by the fire with a mug of hot cocoa. The room was quiet, save for the storm's muffled rage outside, and Emma's gaze kept drifting to Shadow, who lay on a blanket, his breathing steadier now. "He's one of Grayson's dogs," she said softly, her voice tinged with anger. "But he was so scared of him, Grandpa. Why would Grayson just leave him out there?" Henry's face tightened, his hands clenching the arms of his chair. He exchanged a glance with Laura, who nodded slightly, as if giving permission to share a long-held truth. "There's something you need to know, Emma," Henry began, his voice heavy with memory. "Shadow isn't just any dog. He's Rusty's brother, from the same litter. Your mother and I rescued their mother, a sweet Labrador named Daisy, from a bad situation years ago. We raised her puppies, including Rusty and Shadow, right here in this cottage." Emma's eyes widened, her hand pausing on Rusty's head. "Brother?" She looked at Shadow, noticing now the subtle similarities, the shape of his ears, the way his tail curled slightly at the tip, just like Rusty's. "But how did Shadow end up with Grayson?" Henry sighed, the weight of the past settling over him. "Your mother had a gift, Emma, just like you. She could see the heart in any animal, no matter how broken. Daisy's litter was special, smart, loyal, bred for love, not show. We gave Rusty to you and your parents, but Shadow, we placed him with a family we thought would care for him, but they sold him to Grayson when he was barely a year old, chasing his bloodline for profit. Grayson didn't see Shadow's worth, only his flaws. That limp you might have noticed. It's minor, but enough for Grayson to deem him useless for shows." Emma's heart ached as she processed Henry's words. She looked at Shadow, who lifted his head, meeting her gaze with a quiet trust that mirrored Rusty's. "He abandoned him," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just like that." Henry nodded, his eyes glistening. "Your mother would have fought tooth and nail for that dog. She always said animals choose their people, and Shadow chose you out there today." The revelation deepened Emma's resolve. Shadow wasn't just a dog she'd saved. He was family, tied to Rusty and her mother's legacy. But Grayson's claim threatened to tear him away, and Emma knew he'd never give up a dog he saw as property, even one he'd neglected. Laura, finishing her exam of Shadow, spoke up. "He's got some bruising and a slight sprain, but he'll recover. The real fight now is keeping him safe from Grayson. He's already called my clinic, demanding I release the dog to him." Emma's fists clenched, her fear giving way to determination. "We can't let him take Shadow," she said, her voice fierce. "He doesn't care about him." Henry reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "We won't, Emma. But we'll need help, folks in town who know what Grayson's like." Clara, who'd stayed quiet, leaned forward, her sharp eyes glinting. "I've judged dogs longer than Grayson's been in business. His kennel's got a reputation, and not a good one. We'll find a way." The stakes were clear. Emma had saved Shadow, but the battle to keep him was just beginning. With Rusty and Henry by her side and the community rallying, she felt a flicker of hope, even as the storm raged on outside. The storm's wrath had softened to a steady drizzle by the time. The fire in Henry Larson's cottage burned low, casting flickering shadows across the kitchen. Emma sat wrapped in a quilt, her damp braid leaving a wet patch on her shoulder, her eyes fixed on Shadow, the Labrador who lay recovering on a blanket by the hearth. Rusty, her loyal Border Collie, rested his head on her lap, his heart-shaped. Mark a quiet reminder of their shared mission. The revelation that Shadow was Rusty's brother, tied to her mother's legacy, had lit a fire in Emma's heart, but Victor Grayson's looming claim threatened to snuff it out. The room hummed with tension, as Henry, Dr. Laura Bennett, Sheriff Tom Reynolds, and Mrs. Clara Evans huddled around the table, their faces etched with determination. Willow Creek was a town that rallied in times of need, and Emma's bravery had sparked a fire in its people. Henry's voice, rough but steady, broke the silence. "Grayson's got money and lawyers, but he's not untouchable. Folks in town know his kennel's no paradise. We just need proof." Emma looked up, her storm-cloud eyes bright with hope. "Proof of what, Grandpa?" Henry squeezed her hand. "That he's not fit to own Shadow or any dog. Your mother kept records of every animal she placed. If we can find anything on Shadow's sale, we might have a case." Clara Evans, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, leaned forward, her presence commanding despite her age. As a former dog show judge, she'd seen the underbelly of the breeding world and had little patience for men like Grayson. "Victor's been cutting corners for years," she said, her voice sharp as a whip. "I disqualified one of his dogs for aggression a decade ago. Poor thing was trained with fear, not care. If he abandoned Shadow because of that limp, he's likely broken contracts or neglected other dogs. I've got..." Emma's heart lifted. Clara's confidence was infectious, and the idea of the town standing with her made the fight feel less lonely. Laura, checking Shadow's bandages, added, "I've seen dogs from Silver Pines come through my clinic. Underfed, skittish, some with untreated injuries. I've kept detailed notes, but Grayson's always dodged accountability. If we can tie Shadow to his neglect, we might sway a judge." Sheriff Reynolds nodded, his hat resting on the table. "I'll talk to some farmers who've dealt with Grayson. They've got stories. Dogs sold off without proper vetting, puppies taken too young. We'll build a case." The community's resolve wrapped around Emma like a warm blanket. Willow Creek wasn't just a collection of houses, it was a family, forged by shared harvests, winter storms, and the kind of loyalty that didn't bend under pressure. Emma thought of the townsfolk who'd helped her family after the accident. Mrs. Jenkins at the diner slipping extra cookies into her bag, Mr. Patel at the store saving her favorite pencils. Now they were rallying again, not just for her, but for Shadow, a dog who'd become a symbol of what was right. The next morning, the town buzzed with purpose. Clara, true to her word, spent hours on the phone, her voice crisp as she pressed old colleagues for information on Grayson's kennel. By noon, she'd uncovered a lead, a breeder's contract from 5 years ago, signed by Grayson when he purchased Shadow's litter. The contract, Clara explained over coffee at Henry's, required Grayson to return any imperfect puppies to the original breeder, Emma's mother, or provide proof of humane rehoming. Shadow's limp would have disqualified him from shows, Clara said, her eyes gleaming. Grayson didn't return him or rehome him properly. He dumped him, and that's a breach of contract. Emma, sitting cross-legged with Rusty, and Shadow listened intently, her fingers tracing the heart-shaped mark on Rusty's flank. "So we can use that to keep Shadow?" she asked, hope bubbling in her chest. Clara nodded. "It's a start, but we need the original document. Your mother kept meticulous records, Henry. Any chance they're still around?" Henry's face lit with realization. "The attic," he said, pushing himself up with his cane. "Lisa stored her files in a cedar chest up there, breeding records, adoption papers, everything. Never could bring myself to go through it after she passed." Emma's heart skipped. The cedar chest was a relic of her mother's life, a treasure trove of memories she'd only glimpsed in stories. "Can we look now, Grandpa?" she asked, her voice eager. With Laura's help, Henry led the way to the attic, his steps slow but determined. The narrow stairs creaked under their weight, and the air was thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. The cedar chest sat in a corner, its carved lid gleaming faintly in the light from a single bulb. Emma knelt beside it, her hands trembling as Henry unlocked it with a small key from his pocket. Inside were neatly organized files, ribbons from dog shows, and a faded photo of her mother with Daisy, Rusty, and Shadow's mother. Emma's throat tightened. She looked so much like her mom, the same blonde braid, the same gentle smile. Henry sifted through the files, his hands shaking not just from arthritis, but from the weight of memory. "Here," he said, pulling out a yellowed contract with Grayson's signature. Clara scanned it, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. This is it. He was supposed to return Shadow to Lisa or document his placement. He did neither. This could give us legal grounds to challenge his claim. The discovery galvanized the town. Word spread quickly. Mrs. Jenkins told her diner patrons, Mr. Patel shared the news at the store, and soon neighbors were stopping by with stories of Grayson's neglect. A farmer recalled a puppy he'd bought from Silver Pines, sickly and untrained. A teacher mentioned a dog she'd adopted, terrified of loud voices. Each story strengthened their case, and Emma felt the community's love like a shield around her, Rusty, and Shadow. But Grayson wasn't idle. That afternoon, his sleek black SUV pulled up to Dr. Bennett's clinic, where Shadow was resting. He strode in, his suit immaculate despite the mud, and demanded Shadow's return. "That dog's my property," he said, his voice cold. "I've got buyers lined up, and I won't let a child stunt ruin my business." Laura stood firm, her arms crossed. "Shadow's under medical care, Victor. You'll need to show proof of ownership and explain why he was left to die in a ditch." Grayson's face reddened, but he left, promising legal action. Legal. Emma, who'd been at the clinic helping Laura, overheard and clutched Shadow's collar, her resolve hardening. The community's support was growing, but Grayson's wealth and influence were formidable. With the contract in hand and Willow Creek behind her, Emma knew the fight for Shadow was far from over, but she was ready to face it with Rusty and her mother's legacy guiding her. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Willow Creek, casting a soft glow on the fields, still, damp from the storm. At Henry Larson's cottage, the air was filled with the scent of fresh coffee and the quiet hum of purpose. Emma Larson, her blonde braid neatly tied, sat in the backyard meadow, a worn dog training book open on her lap. Beside her, Shadow, the Labrador she'd rescued from the ditch, lay on the grass, his black coat gleaming now that the mud had been washed away. His minor limp was barely noticeable as he watched Emma with soulful eyes, his tail giving a tentative wag. Rusty, Emma's Border Collie, sprawled nearby, his heart-shaped mark catching the light, his presence a steady comfort. The Cedar Chest's contract had given Emma a legal edge against Victor Grayson, but it was Shadow's trust that fueled her determination to keep him safe. Emma's heart still carried the weight of the ditch, her fear, the cold, the moment. She thought she'd lose Shadow to the flood. But now, with the town rallying behind her and Henry's stories of her mother's legacy, she felt a new strength. Shadow wasn't just Rusty's brother. He was a piece of her family, a living link to the parents she'd lost. She couldn't let Grayson take him back to a life of neglect. Henry had taught her that training a dog wasn't just about commands. It was about building trust, and Emma saw in Shadow's cautious glances a spark of hope that she could nurture. "All right. Shadow," Emma said, her voice gentle but firm, holding a small treat above his nose. "Let's try sit." She'd been working with him for days, using the techniques Henry had passed down from her mother: patience, consistency, and a tone that soothed rather than startled. Shadow's ears perked, and though he hesitated, his haunches slowly lowered to the ground. Emma's face lit up. "Good boy," she exclaimed, offering the treat and scratching behind his ears. Shadow's tail wagged faster, his eyes bright with something new. Confidence. Rusty let out a soft woof as if approving, and Emma laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. Henry watched from the porch, his cane resting against his chair, a proud smile creasing his weathered face. "She's got Lisa's gift," he murmured to Dr. Laura Bennett, who'd stopped by to check Shadow's recovery. Laura nodded, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "That dog was terrified when we brought him in. Now look at him, following Emma like she hung the moon." Shadow's transformation was remarkable. The fear that had made him flinch at sudden movements was fading, replaced by a willingness to learn. Emma's gentle persistence was unlocking something in him, just as Rusty had unlocked her own heart after her parents' death. Emma moved to the next command. "Stay," backing away slowly with a treat placed on the grass between them. Shadow's eyes flicked to the treat, but he held his position, his body tense with focus. "You're doing it, Shadow," Emma encouraged, her voice a melody of reassurance. When she said, "Release," Shadow moved forward, taking the treat gently. then returned to sit at her feet, looking up at her with unwavering trust. Emma's chest swelled with pride, but more than that, she felt a bond forming, a partnership, built on mutual survival and love. Shadow wasn't just learning commands, he was learning to believe in her and she in him. The training session was interrupted by a familiar figure approaching through the meadow, Mrs. Clara Evans, her silver hair catching the sunlight, a thick folder tucked under her arm. "Morning." "Emma," Clara called, her voice warm but purposeful. "I've got something you'll want to see." Emma hurried over, Shadow and Rusty trotting at her heels. Clara opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents, emails, registry records, and witness statements from breeders who'd worked with Grayson. "My contacts came through," Clara said. "Grayson's been dodging regulations for years. Overcrowded kennels, falsified health certificates, and at least 3 other dogs abandoned like Shadow. This plus your mother's contract could bury him." Emma's eyes widened, her fingers brushing Shadow's fur for comfort. "So, we can keep him?" she asked, hope trembling in her voice. Clara's smile was cautious but optimistic. "We're close, but Grayson's fighting back. He's hired a lawyer claiming Shadow's a valuable asset. We'll need to show he's unfit, not just legally but morally." Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. Shadow's progress wasn't just a personal victory. That afternoon, Emma took Shadow to Dr. Bennett's clinic for a follow-up, Rusty by her side. The clinic was a sanctuary of antiseptic smells and soft animal sounds, a place where Emma felt her mother's presence in every corner. As Laura examined Shadow, she noted his improved demeanor. "He's responding to you like no one else," she said, her eyes soft. "I've seen scared dogs before, but Shadow, he's different with you, Emma. Like he knows you're his home." Emma beamed, but her joy was tempered by a visit from Sheriff Reynolds, who arrived with news. "Grayson's pushing for a hearing next week," he said, his hat in hand. "He's saying you stole his property, Emma, and he's got a buyer lined up out of state. We've got the contract and Clara's evidence, but it's your connection. With Shadow, that'll make the difference. Keep training him, show the town what he can do." The weight of the challenge settled over Emma, but so did a fierce determination. She thought of the ditch, of Shadow's trust when she freed him, of Rusty's unwavering loyalty. This wasn't just about saving one dog. It was about honoring her mother's belief that every animal deserved love. Back at the cottage, Emma spent the evening with Shadow, practicing commands under Henry's watchful eye. Each success, Shadow lying down on cue, staying despite distractions, felt like a step toward keeping him. Henry, his voice soft with memory, said, "Your mum always said a dog's heart tells the truth." Shadow's telling his Emma, make sure the world hears it. As night fell, Emma sat between Rusty and Shadow, the fire crackling in the hearth. She whispered to them, "We're a family now. I won't let him take you." Shadow nuzzled her hand, and Rusty pressed closer, their warmth a promise that they'd face the fight together. The emotional turning point wasn't just Shadow's trust. It was Emma's realization that she had the strength to fight for what mattered, backed by a community that believed in her. The air in Willow Creek grew heavy with the threat of another spring storm, the horizon bruised with clouds that rolled in like an advancing army. Emma Larson stood at the cottage window, her hands pressed against the glass, watching lightning flicker in the distance. The past week had been a whirlwind of hope and tension. Shadow's training had transformed him from a frightened stray into a responsive, loyal companion, and the town's evidence against Victor Grayson was mounting, with Mrs. Clara Evans' documents painting a damning picture of his kennel's neglect. Yet Grayson's legal threats loomed, his hearing to reclaim Shadow set for 3 days hence. Emma's heart clung to Shadow's progress and Rusty's steadfast presence, her Border Collie's heart-shaped mark, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. But the gathering storm outside mirrored the unease in her chest. Something big was coming, and she felt it in her bones. Henry, seated at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, noticed Emma's restlessness. "Storm's going to be a bad one," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Best stay close today, Emma." She nodded, But Rusty's sudden pacing by the door, his ears pricked and tail stiff, told her staying put might not be an option. Shadow, lying near the hearth, lifted his head, his eyes tracking Rusty's movements. Emma knelt beside them, her hand resting on Shadow's sleek black coat. "What's wrong, Rusty?" she asked. The Border Collie let out a low whine, his gaze fixed on the window, and Emma's pulse quickened. She trusted Rusty's instincts. They'd saved her in the ditch, and they were sounding an alarm now. The phone rang, shattering the quiet. Dr. Laura Bennett's voice was urgent on the other end. "Henry, Emma, we've got trouble. The river's rising again, and Grayson's kennel is in the flood zone. His staff's gone, left the dogs locked in their cages. I'm heading there now, but I need help." Emma's heart lurched. She thought of Shadow, abandoned by Grayson in that ditch, and imagined dozens of dogs trapped, terrified, with no one to save them. "We're coming," she said, before Henry could protest, her voice fierce. Henry's eyes met hers, and though worry creased his face, he saw the same resolve that had defined his daughter, Lisa. "Take the walkie-talkie," he said, handing it to her. "And stay with Laura." Emma grabbed her yellow raincoat, Rusty and Shadow leaping to follow. Henry, despite his arthritis, insisted on coming, his cane tapping determinedly as they piled into Laura's truck, which was already loaded with crates and rescue gear. Sheriff Tom Reynolds met them en route, his patrol car flashing through the rain. "Grayson's out of town," he reported, his face grim. "His foreman says the kennel's locked tight, and the water's already at the fences." Emma's stomach twisted. Grayson's greed had left his dogs to drown, and time was running out. Silver Pine's kennel, once a symbol of Grayson's wealth, was a scene of chaos when they arrived. The river had breached its banks, flooding the lower fields, and water lapped at the kennel's concrete walls. The frantic barking of trapped dogs echoed through the storm, a chorus of fear that tore at Emma's heart. Rusty bounded ahead, his red coat a beacon as he sniffed the perimeter, searching for a way in. Shadow stayed close to Emma, his training with her giving him a calm focus despite the chaos. Laura and Tom forced the main gate, the lock giving way under a crowbar, and the team rushed inside. The kennel was a maze of wire cages, many submerged in ankle-deep water. German shepherds, Dobermans, and Labradors pressed against the bars, their eyes wide with panic. Emma's breath caught. She recognized the same fear she'd seen in Shadow's eyes in the ditch. "We have to get them out," she said, her voice steady despite the rising water. Laura handed her a pair of bolt cutters, her trust in Emma unspoken but clear. "Start with the closest cages," she instructed. "Rusty and Shadow will help guide them." Emma moved quickly, her small hands wielding the cutters with precision. She opened the first cage, and a trembling shepherd stepped out, sniffing her cautiously. "It's okay," she said, using the soothing tone she'd practiced with Shadow. Rusty barked once, sharp and commanding, and the shepherd followed him toward the truck where Tom secured it in a crate. Shadow, limping slightly but undeterred, nudged another dog, a young Labrador, toward safety, his calm presence a contrast to the storm's chaos. Emma's heart swelled with pride. Her dogs were heroes, just as she'd always believed. The water rose to their knees, the current tugging at Emma's legs, but she didn't falter. Henry, stationed at the truck, directed the operation with a clarity that belied his age, his voice carrying over the wind. "Keep moving, Emma. You're doing great." Each cage she opened was a victory, but the sheer number of dogs, over 30, overwhelmed her. Then a deafening crack split the air, and the kennel's back wall buckled, water surging through. "We're out of time!" Laura shouted, grabbing Emma's arm. But Emma spotted one last cage, half submerged, a small Doberman puppy inside, its cries barely audible. "I can't leave it," Emma cried, pulling free. Rusty and Shadow flanked her as she waded through the flood, the water now at her waist. The puppy's eyes locked on hers, and Emma's resolve hardened. She cut the lock, scooping the shivering pup into her arms just as the wall collapsed further, sending a wave that nearly knocked her off her feet. Rusty barked frantically, guiding her back, while Shadow pushed against her, helping her stay upright. Together, they reached the truck, where Henry pulled her into a fierce hug, his cane forgotten. "You're my brave girl," he whispered, tears mixing with the rain on his face. As they loaded the last dogs, a sleek black SUV pulled up. Victor Grayson, his face a mask of shock as he surveyed the flooded kennel. "What's going on here?" he demanded, stepping into the mud. Emma, clutching the Doberman puppy, faced him, her voice unwavering. "Your dogs were drowning. We saved them." Grayson's eyes darted to the crates, then to Shadow, who stood protectively by Emma. For the first time, his polished facade cracked, a flicker of shame crossing his face. The sight of Emma, small, soaked, but fearless, surrounded by her dogs and the community, seemed to shift something in him. "I didn't know it was this bad," he stammered, but Emma's glare silenced him. "You should have," she said, her words cutting deeper than the storm. The rescue was a turning point, not just for the dogs but for Grayson, who saw the cost of his neglect in the eyes of a child who'd risked everything. Willow Creek's unity and Emma's courage had saved lives, and the town would never forget it. The storm had passed, leaving Willow Creek bathed in a fragile calm, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth and renewal. The floodwaters receded, revealing a town scarred but resilient, its people bound tighter by their shared triumph. At Henry Larson's cottage, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, warming the cedar chest that now sat open, its contents, Lisa's breeding, records, photos, and contracts, no longer hidden but a beacon of hope. Emma Larson, her blonde braid catching the light, sat at the table, sketching Shadow and Rusty, their faces vivid on the page. Shadow, the Labrador she'd saved, lay at her feet, his limp barely noticeable, his eyes soft with trust. Rusty, her Border Collie, sprawled beside him, his heart-shaped mark a quiet testament to their bond. The rescue at Grayson's kennel had changed everything, and the town buzzed with the aftermath, but Emma's heart The rescue had exposed Victor Grayson's neglect to the world. The sight of 30 dogs trembling and caged as floodwaters rose had shocked Willow Creek, and the story spread like wildfire. Mrs. Clara Evans' evidence, breeder contracts, registry violations and witness accounts piled up, each piece a nail in the coffin of Grayson's reputation. Sheriff Tom Reynolds had collected statements from volunteers who'd seen the kennel's squalor, and Dr. Laura Bennett's medical records of Grayson's dogs riddled with untreated ailments added weight to the case. But it was Emma's courage, her small figure wading through the flood to save a Doberman puppy, that had shifted the town's heart, and perhaps Grayson's too. 3 days after the rescue, Grayson arrived at the cottage, his usual polished suit replaced by a rumpled jacket, his face drawn with exhaustion. Henry, leaning on his cane, opened the door, his hazel eyes wary but curious. Emma stood behind him, Shadow and Rusty at her side, her hands clenched with anticipation. Grayson cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. "I've come to settle things," he said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. He held out a manila, the envelope, its edges creased. "These are Shadow's papers. I'm relinquishing my claim." Emma's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she took the envelope. Inside were Shadow's registration documents, signed over to her, no strings attached. She looked up, searching Grayson's face for a catch, but found only a flicker of something new, regret perhaps, or humility. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Grayson shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Shadow, who pressed closer, her to Emma. "After the flood, what you did," he said haltingly. "I saw what those dogs mean to you. Shadow's no use to me. His limp ruins his value. But you make him something more." Henry's jaw tightened, but he nodded, recognizing the weight of Grayson's concession. "You're doing the right thing, Victor," he said. "But what about the others?" Grayson hesitated, then pulled another document from his pocket. "I'm selling 5 acres of my land, cheap. I want you to build a sanctuary for the dogs we saved. I'll cover the initial costs." Emma's eyes widened, and even Henry, rarely speechless, blinked in surprise. Grayson's offer wasn't just atonement. It was a chance to rewrite his legacy, spurred by the courage of a 9-year-old girl and a town that wouldn't look away. The news spread quickly, and Willow Creek rallied with a fervor that rivaled the rescue. Mrs. Jenkins organized a fundraiser at the diner, her pies selling out in hours. Mr. Patel donated supplies from his store, and farmers offered labor to clear the land. Clara, her judging days behind her, became the sanctuary's unofficial strategist, sketching plans for spacious kennels and training areas. Laura volunteered to oversee the dogs' health, her clinic a hub for their recovery. The sanctuary, named Lisa's Haven in honor of Emma's mother, would be more than a shelter. It would train therapy and service dogs, giving purpose to those. Grayson had discarded Emma, threw herself into the project, her days split between school and the sanctuary site. She walked the land with Rusty and Shadow, imagining runs where dogs could play, shaded areas for rest, and a training ring where she could teach others her mother's methods. Henry, his arthritis eased by new medication from a specialist Laura, recommended, spent hours with Emma, sharing Lisa's training techniques. "Your mum believed every dog had a gift," he told her one evening, his voice warm with memory. "You're proving her right." Emma beamed, her sketchbook now filled with designs for Lisa's Haven, each page a promise to her parents. Legacy. At the hearing, originally set to decide Shadow's fate, the judge reviewed Clara's evidence and Grayson's signed relinquishment. The case was dismissed in minutes, Shadow officially Emma's. But the true victory came weeks later, when the first kennels rose on the sanctuary land. Grayson, true to his word, stayed out of the spotlight, his donation anonymous to avoid attention. Yet he visited once, quietly observing as Emma led Shadow through a training session, the Labrador responding to her commands with precision. "You were right," he said before leaving, his voice low. "A dog's worth isn't in its pedigree." Henry's health stabilized, the specialist's treatment slowing his arthritis progression. He began teaching Emma more advanced training, his hands steadier as he guided her through Lisa's records. The cedar chest, once a keeper of secrets, now sat in the cottage's living room, its lid open, a symbol of their shared past and future. Emma felt her grief soften, not gone, but woven into a tapestry of purpose. Shadow's presence alongside. Rusty's was a daily reminder that love could heal even the deepest wounds. As the sanctuary took shape, Willow Creek's spirit shone brighter. Neighbors who'd once whispered about that poor Larson girl now greeted Emma with pride, calling her the heart of Lisa's Haven. The dogs from Grayson's kennel, once caged and fearful, began to thrive, their barks filling the air with joy. Emma knew the road ahead would have challenges, training, funding, time, but with Henry, Rusty, Shadow, and the town behind her, she felt ready to face anything. The resolution wasn't just Shadow's freedom or the sanctuary's birth. It was the transformation of a town, a man, and a girl who'd found her voice through the animals she loved. Emma stood on the sanctuary land, Rusty and Shadow at her side, and whispered, "We did it, Mom." The breeze seemed to carry her words, a gentle affirmation that Lisa was listening. Summer unfurled over Willow Creek like a warm embrace, the valley blooming with wildflowers and the hum of cicadas. The scars of the spring floods had faded, replaced by new growth, green shoots in the fields, rebuilt fences, and the skeleton of Lisa's Haven, the sanctuary rising on Victor Grayson's donated land. At its heart stood Emma Larson, now 10, her blonde braids swinging as she directed volunteers with a confidence that belied her age. Gone was the quiet girl who'd once shied from pitying glances. In her place was a young leader, her storm cloud, eyes bright with purpose. Rusty, her Border Collie, trotted at her side, his heart-shaped mark a symbol of their journey, while Shadow, the Labrador she'd saved, followed with a steady gait, his limp a faint echo of his past. The sanctuary wasn't just a place for dogs. It was a testament to Emma's growth and Willow Creek's unbreakable spirit. Emma's transformation had been gradual but profound. The girl who'd once found solace only in animals now thrived. Among people, her voice clear as she assigned tasks, clearing brush, painting kennels, or setting up training rings. The rescue at Grayson's kennel and the fight for Shadow had forged her into someone who understood her own strength. She carried her parents' loss differently now, not as a weight, but as a fire that fueled her mission. Lisa's Haven, named for her mother, was her way of honoring that legacy, and every dog she trained felt like a letter to the parents she'd lost. The sanctuary itself was a marvel of community effort. Mrs. Clara Evans, with her sharp mind and dog show connections, had secured grants to fund the construction, her plans ensuring spacious runs and shaded rest areas. Dr. Laura Bennett oversaw the dog's health, her clinic a lifeline for the 30 rescues from Grayson's Kennel, now thriving under Emma's care. Mrs. Jenkins's diner hosted weekly fundraisers, her pies drawing crowds from neighboring towns, while Mr. Patel donated supplies, his store shelves stocked with dog food and toys for the sanctuary. Even Sheriff Tom Reynolds pitched in, his weekends spent hammering boards alongside farmers and shopkeepers. Willow Creek had always been close-knit, but Lisa's haven wove its people tighter, their shared purpose a balm for old wounds. Emma's days were full, split between school, training dogs, and helping Henry, whose health had steadied with specialized treatment. His arthritis no longer confined him to the cottage. He rolled up his sleeves, teaching Emma advanced techniques from Lisa's cedar chest records. One afternoon, as they worked with a shy German shepherd named Clover, Henry watched Emma guide the dog through a series of commands: sit, stay, come, with a patience that mirrored his daughter's. "You're a natural, Emma," he said, his voice thick with pride. "Your mum's smiling down on you, I know it." Emma beamed, her fingers brushing Clover's fur. "I feel her here, Grandpa, with the dogs." School had changed for Emma too. Once the poor Larson girl, she was now a local hero, her story of saving Shadow and the kennel dogs a legend among her classmates. Friends who'd once kept their distance now sought her out, eager to hear about Lisa's haven or pet Rusty and Shadow during visits. Emma taught a small group of kids basic training commands, her patience with them as natural as with the dogs. One classmate, a shy boy named Tim, bonded with a mixed-breed pup named Sparky, and Emma's heart swelled watching them play. "You're good at this," she told Tim, echoing Henry's words to her. The sanctuary was teaching her that leadership wasn't just about courage, it was about lifting others up. The dogs themselves were a testament to transformation. The rescues, once caged and fearful, now bounded through the sanctuary's fields, their barks a chorus of joy. Shadow, in particular, had become Emma's partner, his intelligence and calm demeanor making him a candidate for therapy work. During a visit to the local nursing home organized by Mrs. Jenkins, Emma guided Shadow through the common room, where elderly residents lit up at his gentle nudges. One woman, Mrs. Carter, "He reminds me of my old dog," she whispered. Emma's throat tightened. She was giving back to Willow Creek, just as it had given to her. Henry, too, found new purpose. The cedar chest records, once a painful reminder of Lisa, became his teaching tools. He mentored volunteers, sharing Lisa's methods for breeding and training dogs for temperament, not just appearance. His hands, steadier now, gestured animatedly as he explained to a group of farmers how to read a dog's body language. "It's about trust," he said, glancing at Emma, who was training Clover nearby. "That's what my daughter taught me, and what Emma's teaching you." The sanctuary was his legacy too, a way to keep Lisa's light alive. Willow Creek's unity deepened through the sanctuary. Neighbors who'd bickered over fence lines or politics worked side by side, their laughter mingling with the dogs' barks. Even Victor Grayson, though absent, sent occasional supplies through a lawyer, his transformation quieter but real. He'd shifted his kennel to focus on ethical breeding, consulting Clara for advice, a move no one had expected. Emma, hearing this, felt a flicker of forgiveness. Grayson's change didn't erase the past, but it proved her actions had rippled beyond Shadow. One evening, as the sanctuary's first kennels neared completion, Emma stood on the hill overlooking the site, Rusty and Shadow at her side. The setting sun painted the valley gold, and she felt a quiet pride. She wasn't just the girl who'd lost her parents. She was Emma Larson, builder of Lisa's haven, leader of a community that believed in second chances. "We're doing it, aren't we?" she whispered to her dogs. Rusty nudged her hand, and Shadow's tail wagged, their answers clear. The sanctuary was more than a place. It was a promise that love and courage could heal, for dogs and people alike, Emma's. Growth had transformed her into a beacon for Willow Creek, her confidence a mirror of the town's renewed unity. As she walked back to the cottage, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, she knew Lisa's haven would carry her family's legacy forward, one wagging tail at a time. Autumn draped Willow Creek in a tapestry of crimson and gold. The valley alive, with the crunch of leaves and the crisp promise of new beginnings. Lisa's haven, the sanctuary born from Emma Larson's courage and the town's unity, stood proudly on its 5-acre plot, its kennels gleaming under the morning sun. The sanctuary's grand opening had drawn a crowd, farmers in flannel, shopkeepers with their families, and even visitors from neighboring towns, all gathered to celebrate a dream made real. Emma, now 10, stood at the center of it all, her blonde braid shining, her storm-cloud eyes sparkling with a joy that hadn't always come easily. Rusty, her Border Collie, sat at her side, his heart-shaped mark a quiet emblem of their journey, while Shadow, the Labrador she'd saved, waited patiently, his black coat sleek and his limp a badge of survival. The sanctuary was more than a place for dogs. It was a testament to love's power to heal, and today Emma would show the world what that meant. The past months had woven Emma's transformation into Willow Creek's fabric. The shy girl who'd once hidden behind Rusty's fur was now a confident leader, her voice steady as she welcomed the crowd. Lisa's haven had become a hub for training therapy and service dogs, its first graduates, dogs once discarded by Victor Grayson, already changing lives. Emma had poured her heart into the sanctuary, training alongside Henry, whose health had stabilized, and Dr. Laura Bennett, whose clinic supported the dog's recovery. Mrs. Clara Evans had secured partnerships with regional hospitals, ensuring the sanctuary's dogs would serve veterans and nursing home residents. The cedar chest, its records of Lisa's methods now a guiding light, sat in the sanctuary's office, a symbol of a legacy reborn. Emma stepped onto a makeshift stage, a wooden platform adorned with wildflowers from the meadow. Shadow followed, his leash loose in her hand, his eyes fixed on her with unwavering trust. Rusty settled nearby, his presence a steady anchor. The crowd hushed, their faces warm with pride. Mrs. Jenkins from the diner, Mr. Patel from the store, Sheriff Tom Reynolds, and dozens of neighbors who'd built this haven with their hands and hearts. Henry, his cane polished for the occasion, stood beside Clara, his hazel eyes glistening. "Go on, Emma," he whispered, his voice thick. "Show 'em what you've got." Taking a deep breath, Emma addressed the crowd, her voice clear despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Lisa's haven is for dogs who need a second chance," she began, her words carrying the wisdom of her mother's teachings. "Like Shadow, who was left in a ditch, or Rusty, who's been my best friend since I was 6, they taught me that love makes you brave, and that's what we do here. We help dogs and people find their strength together." The crowd nodded, some wiping tears, others smiling at the dogs playing in the nearby runs. Emma turned to Shadow, her partner in this journey. "Shadow's training to be a therapy dog," she explained. "He helps people feel safe just like he helped me." She gave a soft command, "Shadow, come." And the Labrador walked to her side, sitting with a grace that belied his past fears. The crowd murmured in awe as she demonstrated his skills, retrieving a dropped scarf, opening a mock door, and lying calmly as Emma mimicked a distressed person, his head resting gently on her knee. Each action was a testament to their bond, forged in the flood and strengthened through months of trust. When Shadow nudged her hand, eliciting a laugh, the applause was thunderous, a celebration of hope reborn. A group of veterans, invited through Clara's hospital connections, watched from the front row. One, a young woman named Sarah with a prosthetic leg, approached Emma after the demonstration, her eyes bright. "I've been matched with Clover, one of your shepherds," she said, gesturing to the dog Emma had trained. "She's already helping me sleep better. Thank you, Emma." Emma's cheeks flushed, but she nodded, her heart swelling. "Clover's special," she said. "She chose you." Sarah's smile mirrored Emma's, a shared understanding of what it meant to heal through an animal's love. The ceremony continued, with a ribbon cutting, Henry and Emma wielding oversized scissors as the crowd cheered. Lisa's haven was officially open, its kennels filled with wagging tails and its training rings ready for the next litter, bred from Lisa's ethical methods. Volunteers led tours, showing off the spacious runs and shaded rest areas, while Mrs. Jenkins served pie from a food stall, her laughter mingling with children's giggles. Even Victor Grayson sent a discreet donation, a final act of amends though he stayed away. His kennel now a smaller, kinder operation under Clara's watchful eye. As the day wound down, Emma slipped away to the sanctuary's hill, Rusty and Shadow at her side. The valley stretched below, its beauty a reminder of the storms they'd weathered. She pulled out her sketchbook, now filled with drawings of the sanctuary, her dogs and her parents' faces, their smiles clearer in her memory. "I think you'd love this, Mum," she whispered, her voice soft. "Dad, too." The breeze seemed to answer, carrying the scent of wildflowers, and Emma felt their presence in the dog's warmth, the town's love, the sanctuary's promise. Back at the cottage that evening, the family gathered around the kitchen table, the cedar chest, a quiet sentinel in the living room. Henry shared stories of Lisa's first dog show, his laughter easing the ache of her absence. Emma listened, her hand resting on Shadow, Rusty's head in her lap. "I want to be a vet like you, Grandpa," she announced, her voice firm. "Dr. Bennett says I can volunteer more next year if my grades stay good." Henry's eyes twinkled. "Your mom wanted that too before she chose teaching. She'd be over the moon, Emma." The heartwarming conclusion wasn't just the sanctuary's opening or Shadow's transformation. It was Emma's journey from grief to purpose, and Willow Creek's from division to unity. Lisa's haven stood as a beacon, its dogs carrying love to those who needed it most, veterans, the elderly, children like Emma who'd learned to heal through a wagging tail. As night fell, the sanctuary's lights glowed, a promise that courage and compassion could rebuild what was lost, creating a legacy that would ripple through generations. Emma looked at her family, Henry, Rusty, Shadow, and smiled. "We're home," she said, and in their eyes she saw her parents' love forever hers.